It is my purpose. It is my purpose in this volume to trace the development of Castilian allegory from its first appearance in the vernacular during the 13th to its culmination in the 15th century. But the history of the type may be better followed by some reference to precedents in the Latin literature of the peninsula. The Middle Ages, to which I have restricted myself, may be regarded as extending in Spain to the accession of Isabella the Catholic in 1474. Although forewarnings of the Renaissance begin to intrude themselves somewhat before that date. Since, however, allegory does not suddenly cease with the death of Isabella's predecessor, Henry IV, I have added a brief examination of its subsequent vicissitudes during the late 15th and early 16th centuries. I do not pretend to have included every example that falls within the period, inasmuch as a medieval writer was so to the manner born that he could seldom complete an otherwise unadorned production without lapsing here and there into allegory. But I trust that I have excluded no integral part of Spanish allegorical history. The book falls into two main divisions, the first treating the general aspects of the subject, the second the chronological evolution of the type. To Professors J.D.M. Ford and W.H. Schofield, I am deeply indebted for reading the proofs and for many other services. Professor Ford suggested to me the idea of the work, and both he and Professor Schofield have aided me constantly with the kindest, readiest, and most valuable advice. Cambridge, Massachusetts, December 1914. The word allegory The word allegory is now employed as a convenient pigeonhole for such a hodgepodge of writings that the difficult task of definition at once imposes itself upon anyone who is audacious enough to meddle with the subject. I do not presume to offer a definition that will satisfy the conceptions of every investigator, nor am I concerned to establish my own conception against all others. My desire is to discuss a certain type of Spanish literature for which I must find a name. Since in common parlance, most compositions of this kind are dubbed allegories, I adopt the term as a modus operandi, waiving any argument with the learned pundits as to its propriety. I mean by allegory that literary type which crystallizes a more or less abstract idea by presenting it in the concrete form of a fictitious person, thing, or event. Under such a definition would be included the ordinary divisions of medieval allegory, of which Spain affords abundant examples. The crystallization of abstractions into fictitious persons is illustrated by the tediously common figures of the virtues and vices. The concrete presentation of an idea through an imaginary thing appears in a passage of the Libro de Buen Amor by Juan Ruiz, the truest Spanish poet of the 14th century, where he advises as a defense against the vices, the ghostly weapons of the sacraments, and the virtues. The crystallization of abstractions into events is found in the descriptions of the vicissitudes of love as occurrences in a fantastic garden or forest, and in the eulogies of potentates by depicting them as the recipients of honors at pretended courts. Strictly speaking, those cases in which one concrete thing is figured under the guise of another are metaphorical rather than allegorical. But we need not consider separately the few examples produced in Spain. For instance, the compositions in which Fray Diego de Valencia depicts human beings under the forms of inanimate objects, his mistress in the semblance of a garden of delights. Laden with luscious fruits, and melodious with siren songs. And the 7 children of Don Fernando of Aragon, and as so many plants watered by 2 perennial springs from paradise. Emphasis should be laid in the definition upon the adjective fictitious. Allegory starts with an idea and creates an imaginary object as its exponent. If one starts with an actual object and from it receives the suggestion of an idea, one is a symbolist. The primary difference between symbolism and allegory is that the former sees sermons in stones, the latter from phantom stones builds sermons. Certain Spanish poems resembling the French pastourelle and the Provençal pastorela described with picturesque detail the encounter of the author with a maiden in the country under varying attendant circumstances. When these meetings are regarded as ideals, setting forth in concrete form some abstract relationship, such as the perfect union between the lovers, they constitute a species of allegory or symbolism. If occasionally they chance to have a basis in reality, they would fall under the latter heading, but since in the majority of instances they are palpably inventions. I have not sought to distinguish the 2 types. Characteristic illustrations are afforded by Francisco Imperial, the Sevillian poet of the beginning of the 15th century. In one instance, he pictures a lady hunting by the banks of the Guadalquivir. He hurries to dismount at her feet, but she forestalls him, takes the garland from her head, and humbles herself before him. When he beseeches her to desist, she addresses him a holostrophe in French, thanking him for the honor that he has bestowed upon her through his verses. The idyll concludes with the writer's offer of his services. The episode is an exquisite allegory of the poet's devotion to his lady and her gratitude, if such an event actually occurred, similar in all details or merely in the underlying idea. It is still conceived as typical of the harmony existing between the pair. In all probability, however, these incidents are imaginary, for they readily pass into the realm of fancy. In another poem of this very sequence, to the lady whose identity he conceals under the title Estrella Diana, he represents himself as about to do battle for her before the court of love, encased in armor forged out of her different charm. And in a third, he apostrophizes poetry and rhetoric, who have enthroned themselves in her. Again, within the limits of a single piece, the author, who is probably imperial, begins as if recounting a real meeting, and then soars serenely off into the domain of pure invention. Floating in a boat upon the Guadalquivir, he espies his lady upon the island of Sancho Afan, bow and arrow in hand, amidst the laurels of fresh verdure. Heedless of her warning not to disembark, he leaps upon the shore, only to receive a wound from her poisoned shaft. She has stricken him down for an offense against her, but upon his denial of serious guilt, she bids him extract the arrow and pardons him. The delicate narrative crystallizes a strained relationship, but contains such obvious fictitious elements as the envenomed dart. It is plain, by the ease with which the author makes the transition from the descriptions of such encounters to the ordinary sort of erotic allegory, and to the common personifications that he deems them all members of the same category. If allegory be thus understood, what is its connection with that favorite medieval type, the vision? For the purposes of this discussion, it is not necessary to distinguish between the ordinary dream and the vision vouchsafed by heaven. The events of the latter were doubtless conceived as existing on a plane of greater reality, but I use the terms as synonymous, as by constant manipulation, allegorical composition acquired greater artistic excellence. The custom became more general of adorning it with a visionary framework. The reason is not far to seek. The imaginary events were of so extravagant an order as to distress even the medieval man, fond as he was of the weird and bizarre. No mind can long find food in the utterly unreal. No mind can long find food in the utterly unreal. To those who cater to the state of the times, perhaps unconsciously sense the difficulty and discovered a remedy ready at hand if they could veil their material in the haze of a dream, which was the natural atmosphere of chimerical happenings. It would seem less remote from the sphere of human experience, and hence less incredible. Anything might occur in a vision the reader could accept and even relish allegorical eccentricities thus enhanced. Since the vision itself was as popular as the allegory for which it came to be used as an ornament, such a combination possessed the additional advantage of a double interest. The writer killed 2, nay 3 birds with one stone. He satisfied the craving for the supernatural. He maintained a pseudo-realistic milieu, and he appealed the more strongly to the approbation of his fellows by uniting the two objects of their literary admiration, allegory and the vision. It is raining on the skylight pretty heavily. The writer killed 2, nay 3 birds with one stone. He satisfied the craving for the supernatural. He maintained a pseudo-realistic milieu, and he appealed the more strongly to the approbation of his fellows by uniting the two objects of their literary admiration, allegory and the vision. Inasmuch, then, as any discussion of medieval allegory involves reference to the vision, it is not necessary to apologize for tracing its evolution in Spain. The early ecstasies of holy personages relating visitations of angels or demons, journeys to the other world, or the like, of which the Iberian Peninsula produced even many Latin examples, were sincerely thought to be objectively real, and not the imaginative dressing of some spiritual truth. When literature, however, became more and more a conscious art, though there still persisted the description of saintly visions conceived as actual experiences in a comatose state, the visionary form was appropriated as a mere device. During the initiatory stages of the appropriation, it is often impossible to determine if the subject is religious, whether the writer believed in the events that he unfolded. The best instance in Spain is Gonzalo de Berceo, the monastic poet of the 13th century. In his work may be distinguished 2 and possibly 3 different attitudes towards a purely artificial use of the vision. The Vida de Santa Oria is virtually a long series of visions experienced by the holy nun and her mother Amuña, the chief of which constituting the pivot of the whole composition is Oria's dream of an assumption into heaven and the sight of the throne prepared for her in paradise. The maid's confessor, who wrote the lost Latin biography that Berceo paraphrased, probably had implicit faith in all that he recorded. One can only guess whether Berceo himself put any credence in such decorative details as the column of steps leading into heaven, the mysterious tree in the kind of earthly paradise at the top, and the curious figure of Vox-Mea beside the vacant throne of Oria. But it is almost certain that he regarded as true in general outlined the saint's journey beyond the veil, and the mother's glimpses of her dead husband and of her daughter's glory. And that he bestowed an objective existence upon the various guides and other personages who appear in the world beyond. From elaborate and highly colored visions like this, however real to the mind of the writer, it is but a step to the purely fictitious journeys of the 15th and 16th centuries, such as Juan de Mena's experience in the Mansion of Fortune. In the Laberinto, Santillana's encounter with its stricken ladies. In the Comedietta de Ponza, or Juan de Padilla's circuit through the 12 triumphs of the apostles. If Berceo had not believed in Oria's raptures, he might still have utilized them as an innocent subterfuge for setting forth concretely and more effectively the saint's spiritual ascendancy and certainty of bliss. The Vida de Santo Domingo de Silos is nearer the artificial use of the form. In the one vision that Berceo relates, Domingo, coming in the midst of a gloomy region to a river whence issued 2 streams, one white, the other crimson, crosses a glass bridge fraught with terrors, and is rewarded by 2 heavenly messengers with 3 crowns of unearthly brilliance, one for holiness in the religious life, one for his devotion to the Virgin, one for his services to the monastery. Here again, with Grimaldus, whom Berceo translates freely, the story probably went for its face value, but to Berceo the setting itself must have been more or less imaginary, and the presentation of the crowns may or may not have been understood as upon a plane of partial truth. In any case, the vision is an attractive device for making concrete the holy man's success in the 3 forms of his activity, and is thus not so remote an ancestor of that peculiar Spanish type of allegory popularized by Santillana and Juan de Mena, the Coronation, in which the author purports to dream that the person whom he wishes to extol is crowned by the muses, the liberal arts, or the virtues. If Perseo could If Perseo could with surety be declared the author of the Libro de Alexandre, he would then illustrate still better the adaptation of the vision to allegory. In one section of the epic, nature, afraid lest Alexander steal her secrets and hold her in subjection, is represented as descending through all the accumulated horrors of hell. In one section of the epic, nature, afraid lest Alexander steal her secrets and hold her in subjection, is represented as descending through all the accumulated horrors of hell. In one section of the epic, nature, afraid lest Alexander steal her secrets and hold her in subjection, is represented as descending through all the accumulated horrors of hell, graphically retailed at length to seek aid of Satan, and as finally prevailing upon him to convoke an infernal council in which treachery proffers herself to stir up Antipater against his sovereign. Although these episodes are not actually a vision of the author or of anyone else in the composition, for the present purpose they may be considered as such, since they are like the details of the ordinary vision of the infernal regions. The ordinary vision of the infernal regions. How much of the story the author of, or his Latin source Gautier de Chatillon, accepted is again difficult to determine. Obviously, certain details must have been discredited. Such is the personification of treachery and of the vices who beset the entrance to hell. The participation of treachery in the council is a concrete presentation of the motive that actuated Antipater. Within certain limits, then the writer employs this descent into hell as a picturesque device to indicate more vividly the reasons for the rebellion against Alexander. Whether or no Perseo be responsible for the poem, it gives us that point in the evolution of allegory Whether or no Perseo be responsible for the poem, It gives us that point in the evolution of allegory where the vision is partially fictitious and is utilized as a literary artifice. There is only a short road to travel to the allegorical use of a whole vision. In the 15th century, the Marquis of Santillana, Juan de Mena, and their successors freely employ a pretended dream for erotic, eulogistic, and all ordinary fantasies. And in some cases, even invent a heavenly vision to increase the interest of religious material. For the purpose of setting forth the propriety of canonizing the Dominican Vincent Ferrer and the Franciscan Pedro de Villacreces, the Marquis conceives that, transported to the celestial realms and to the presence of the saints and angels, he hears Saint Dominic praying for the double honor, and beholds an angel descending to announce the divine compliance. In a similar fashion, to impress more deeply on his readers the glory of the apostles, Juan de Padilla indulges in the same sort of vision as is granted to Berceo's saints. The difference is that Berceo more or less believed in these raptures. Santillana and Padilla practiced them unblushingly as tricks of the trade.